Welcome to Bookish Mind Podcast, Season 4, Episode 19, where we wrap our minds around the Goldilocks Rule from James Clear's Atomic Habits. In this deep dive, we plunge into the psychology of peak motivation and why mastering habits means pushing just beyond your comfort zone even when boredom sets in. Today, our mission is really to unpack this critical idea for anyone trying to build lasting habits. How do you stay engaged? How do you make consistent progress without getting derailed by tasks that are, too easy or way too hard or just plain boring? We've got some fascinating source material on this, and I'm really excited to explore what it all means for you. So to kick us off, let's unpack this with a really great story from the sources. It's about someone whose career just perfectly illustrates this whole concept. Steve Martin, picture this. It's 1955. Disneyland has just opened its gates in Anaheim, and this 10-year-old kid walks in and asks for a job.
10 years old.
Yeah, apparently labor laws were a bit looser back then. Anyway, this kid, Steve Martin, he actually lands a job selling guidebooks. Within about a year, he moves over to Disney's magic shop. And that's where it really started. He began learning tricks, trying out jokes, simple routines, on the visitors. He pretty quickly figured out that what he loved wasn't just the magic itself, but performing in general. And that set him on the path to becoming a comedian.
What's so fascinating there is how early he began, honing that craft, even before he really knew what it was he was honing, maybe?
Exactly.
And the sources really make it clear. His journey wasn't about some instant flash of stardom. It was much more deliberate, almost like a scientific approach to just sticking with it, persistence.
Absolutely. Starting when he was just a teenager, Steve began performing in these small clubs around LA.
Right.
The crowds, tiny, sometimes apparently the clubs were completely empty.
Can you even imagine delivering stand-up to an empty room?
I know. It's wild. His first acts were maybe 1 or 2 minutes long. Super short. But by high school, he got it up to 5 minutes, then 10 a few years later. By the time he was 19, he was doing 20 minutes, week after week.
That's real dedication.
It wasn't glamorous at all. It was just relentless. He spent another whole decade experimenting, tweaking his act, practicing. He even took a job as a TV writer for a while, slowly getting appearances on talk shows himself.
Building it piece by piece.
Yeah, and by the mid-70s, he was a regular guest on The Tonight Show, Saturday Night Live. The big time was starting to happen.
It's quite a trajectory, isn't it? Especially when you think he finally hit real fame after nearly 15 years of this really grueling, persistent work.
15 years.
Yeah. He went from touring 60 cities in 63 days, then 72 cities in 80 days, then 85 cities in 90.
That's insane.
He had over 18,000 people at one show in Ohio. 45,000 tickets sold for just 3 days in New York. He just completely catapulted to the very top.
It's incredible. And what really strikes me is his own summary of it all. He famously said, 10 years spent learning, 4 years spent refining, and 4 years as a wild success.
That really puts it in perspective.
Right. The sources emphasize that he faced this terrifying prospect, performing totally alone on stage, maybe failing to get a single laugh every single week for 18 years.
18 years. And that's exactly where this Goldilocks Rule idea really connects. What's so interesting is how his persistence, it wasn't just blind effort, brute force. It seems like it was guided by this intuitive sense of optimal challenge.
Okay, so the Goldilocks Rule. Break that down for us.
The core idea is pretty straightforward. Humans hit peak motivation when we're working on tasks that have just manageable difficulty. So not too hard, not too easy, but
Just right, like the porridge.
exactly like the porridge. It's about finding that sweet spot where you're definitely pushed, but you're not completely overwhelmed. The challenge is real, but you feel like, okay, if I really focus, if I put in the effort, I can do this.
Okay, that makes sense. I can see that.
Think about it with, say, tennis. If you love playing tennis,
Right.
and you try to play a serious match against a 4-year-old.
Right. You'd get bored instantly. Too easy.
Exactly. Boring. Now, flip side. You play against a pro like Roger Federer or Serena Williams.
Yeah. Hopelessly demotivating. You just get crushed.
Right, because it's way too difficult. But now, imagine playing against someone who's pretty much your equal. As the game goes on, you win some points, you lose some points, you've got a decent shot at winning, but only if you really try hard.
You get focused.
Totally focused. Distractions just fade away. You're fully immersed in the game. That is a challenge of just manageable difficulty. That's the Goldilocks Rule in action.
Got it. And the sources connect this to actual psychology research, don't they?
They do, yeah. In psychology, there's something called the Yerkes-Dodson law. It basically describes this optimal level of arousal, your mental and physical readiness, as being right at the midpoint between boredom on one side and anxiety or being overwhelmed on the other.
The sweet spot again.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And Steve Martin, he's a perfect example. Each year, he expanded his comedy routine, but only by like a minute or two. Small increments.
Right. Manageable steps.
Exactly. He was always adding new material, pushing himself a bit, but he also kept some jokes that he knew were guaranteed laughs.
Ah, so a mix.
A mix. Just enough wins to keep him motivated, but also just enough mistakes or challenges to keep him working hard, refining things. That balance, that seems to be the key.
Okay, so let's bring this back to our own habits. How do we actually apply this Goldilocks rule day to day? Like, when you're first starting a habit, should you aim for just right immediately, or is easy the way to go?
That is a fantastic question. And the source material is quite clear on this distinction. For starting a habit, especially when things aren't perfect, making it as easy as humanly possible is critical.
Okay.
Think of the third law of behavior change, right? Make it easy. You just want to get the reps in, minimize friction, make the behavior happen.
Get it established first?
Precisely. But once that habit is established, that's when the game changes. You need to keep advancing, but in small ways. These little improvements, these new challenges, they're crucial because they keep you engaged. If something stays too easy for too long,
You get bored again.
you get bored. It loses its power to hold your attention.
So the just right difficulty level actually shifts over time. You start super easy to build the consistency, then you gradually dial up the challenge to stay interested.
Exactly right. And if you manage to hit that Goldilocks zone consistently, you can even tap into what psychologists call a flow state.
Being in the zone.
Yeah, that feeling of being completely immersed, time just flies by. Now, some research suggests the sweet spot for flow is a task that's about 4% beyond your current ability.
4%, how do you even measure that?
Right. The sources acknowledge that quantifying it precisely isn't really practical for most things in daily life. But the principle holds. Being right there on the perimeter of your ability, as Clear calls it.
On the edge.
On the edge. You're challenged, maybe you feel a little friction, but you push through, and that effort itself becomes part of the focus. It's subtle, but really powerful when you find it.
That's a really crucial point, because improvement is such a delicate balance, isn't it?
Yep.
You need those challenges, pushing your edge, but you also need to see enough progress to stay motivated.
You do.
Yeah.
And this brings up another important question. Why do we need to keep pushing that edge? Why keep things novel?
Yeah, why?
Because fundamentally, behaviors need to stay novel, at least to some degree, to remain attractive and satisfying.
So.
Without variety, without that little edge of challenge, we just get bored.
Okay.
And the source makes a pretty bold claim here.
Yeah.
Boredom might just be the greatest villain on the quest for self-improvement.
Wow, the greatest villain. That's strong. And this is where things get really interesting, I think. Because the sources shift focus to something few people really talk about. How do you stay focused when you inevitably get bored working on your goals? The author tells this great story from his time on a weightlifting team. He met this elite coach, someone who'd worked with thousands of athletes, Olympians even, and he asked him basically, what's the real difference? What do the best athletes do that others don't?
Yeah, the million-dollar question.
Right. And the coach mentions the obvious things first: genetics, luck, talent, sure. But then he says something really surprising. He says, at some point, it comes down to who can handle the boredom of training every day, doing the same lifts over and over and
Over and over. That hits home.
It really does. And it challenges that common idea, doesn't it? We tend to think successful people just have this endless wellspring of passion and motivation.
Right. And if we don't feel that passion 24/7, we think something's wrong with us.
Exactly. We get depressed when motivation dips. But this coach is saying, no, the truly successful people, they feel the same lack of motivation sometimes. They feel the boredom just like everyone else. The difference is they still find a way to show up.
That is such a profound insight. And it connects directly to why mastery demands practice, but also why that practice can become, well, incredibly dull.
Yeah.
Once you get past those initial beginner gains, when things were new and exciting.
And the results were coming fast.
Right. Once the outcomes become more predictable, more expected, our interest naturally starts to fade. It becomes easy to rationalize skipping a day, right? Oh, things are going well. I'm in a good groove. I can take today off.
Totally been there.
We all have. But here's the kicker from the source. The greatest threat to success is not failure, but boredom.
Not failure, but boredom.
Yeah. Our habits stop delighting us. They become ordinary, mundane. And so we start looking for novelty again, derailing our own progress. Maybe that's why we jump from one workout plan to the next, or one diet to another, or chase the next shiny business idea.
It's that constant search for something new, even if the old thing was actually working pretty well.
It reminds me of that Machiavelli quote the source uses. Men desire novelty to such an extent that those who are doing well wish for a change as much as those who are doing badly.
Huh. So even when things are good, we want to shake them up.
It seems almost hardwired into us, yeah. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, this powerful drive for novelty, it's exactly why so many of the most habit-forming products out there are designed to provide continuous novelty.
Okay, like what?
Well, think about it. Video games. Constant visual novelty, new levels, new challenges. Pornography, obvious sexual novelty. Even junk foods often rely on culinary novelty. New flavors, textures, combinations.
Social media feeds.
Perfect example. Always something new, always changing, even if it's just slightly different. Keeps you scrolling.
Right.
In psychology, this mechanism is called variable rewards. Slot machines are the classic example. Right?
Yeah, you never know when you'll hit the jackpot.
Exactly. The gambler wins sometimes,
Yeah.
but not on any predictable schedule. That unpredictability, that variance in the reward schedule, that's what leads to the biggest spike in dopamine. It enhances memory recall, and it seriously accelerates habit formation.
So the unpredictability is actually key.
It's huge. Now, it's important to clarify, variable rewards don't create a craving out of thin air. If you have zero interest in something, variable rewards won't magically make you addicted.
Okay.
But they are incredibly powerful at amplifying the cravings we already have. And they do that specifically because they combat boredom so effectively. They keep things feeling fresh and unpredictable.
So it's less about making you want something new and more about making you want the thing you already want, but more intensely by keeping it interesting.
You got it. The source talks about the sweet spot of desire occurring around a 50-50 split between success and failure.
50-50.
Yeah. You get what you want about half the time.
Yeah.
You don't the other half. You need just enough winning to feel satisfied, but also just enough wanting, enough anticipation to keep that desire burning.
Ah, okay.
And this is actually one of the hidden benefits of applying the Goldilocks rule to habits you already have. If you're already interested, working on challenges that are just right naturally introduces a kind of variability that keeps things engaging.
That makes sense. But obviously not every habit should be variable, right? Like I want Google to work every time.
Absolutely. You wouldn't want Google search giving you useful results only half the time, or your Uber showing up maybe 50% of the time.
Definitely not.
For a lot of essential foundational activities, brushing your teeth, locking your door where we expect, and need consistent, positive outcomes, variability would be terrible there.
Okay, so variable rewards or not, the underlying truth seems to be that no habit, no matter how important or initially exciting, is going to stay interesting forever.
That seems to be the reality.
Sooner or later, everyone hits that same wall on the journey of self-improvement. You
Yeah.
somehow have to fall in love with boredom, which sounds difficult.
It does sound counterintuitive, doesn't it? But this is where the source draws a really stark line between, let's call them professionals and amateurs.
Okay.
It doesn't matter what you're trying to get better at, playing an instrument, writing, coding, exercising, meditating. If you only do the work when it feels convenient or when you feel excited and motivated,
You won't be consistent enough.
exactly, you'll never achieve truly remarkable results. Professionals, on the other hand, they stick to the schedule. They show up, even when it's annoying or painful or boring or just plain draining.
They push through the boredom.
They push through. They know what's important to them, and they work towards it with purpose. Amateurs, the source suggests, tend to get pulled off course by all the little urgencies and distractions of life.
I remember reading about David Kane, the meditation teacher. He talks about avoiding being a fair weather meditator.
That's a great phrase.
Yeah. And you can apply it everywhere, right?
Right.
You don't want to be a fair weather athlete or a fair weather writer or a
Yeah.
fair weather parent or anything, really.
Mm-hmm.
When a habit truly matters to you, you have to be willing to stick with it, no matter what mood you're in. Professionals take action even when the mood isn't right. They might not enjoy that particular session, but they find a way to put the reps in anyway.
And this is where maybe that deeper psychological shift comes in. How do you fall in love with something that feels monotonous?
Yeah.
Often, it seems to be about reframing it. Instead of seeing the boredom as this negative signal, this reason to stop,
Yeah.
You learn to see it differently. Maybe you view it as a sign of progress.
Like a badge of honor.
Kinda. Like, okay, I'm past the easy beginner phase.
Yeah.
I'm entering the zone of real mastery now. And sometimes mastery involves repetition. It's a shift from needing constant external excitement to finding satisfaction in the discipline itself.
Finding reward in the process, not just the outcome.
Exactly. The author of our source material shares his own reflection on this. He says there have been tons of workout sets he didn't feel like finishing, but he's never regretted actually doing the workout.
Yeah.
Lots of articles he didn't feel like writing, but he never regretted publishing on schedule. Lots of days he felt like just relaxing, but he never regretted showing up and putting in the work on something that was truly important to him.
That really resonates. You rarely regret doing the hard, important thing, even if it felt like a slog at the time.
Almost never.
So it really does seem to boil down to this idea. The only way to become excellent is to be endlessly fascinated by doing the same thing over and over. You have to fall in love with boredom. It's not about forcing enthusiasm you don't feel.
No, not at all.
But about finding a deeper purpose in the persistence itself.
Absolutely. It's about building that strong internal reward system. The reward isn't just hitting the goal. The reward is also the act of showing up, the act of enduring, the cultivation of that discipline day in, day out.
So wrapping this up, what does all this mean for you listening right now? This deep dive has really highlighted two, I think, core truths from James Clear's work. First, and the power of the Goldilocks Rule, finding that sweet spot of challenge to keep motivation high.
Right. Finding tasks that are just manageably difficult.
And second, this often overlooked, maybe less glamorous necessity, embracing the boredom that inevitably comes with mastering any real skill or habit.
Ultimately, that difference between making consistent progress and just stagnating, it often comes down to our ability to first push just beyond our comfort zone.
The Goldilocks push.
Exactly. And then, crucially, to just keep going, keep showing up, even when that initial spark, that excitement, inevitably fades. It really is about finding satisfaction, not just in the prize at the end, but in the disciplined, sometimes repetitive, sometimes, yes, boring process itself.
We really hope this deep dive has given you some powerful insights, maybe a new perspective on building habits that truly last. Now, for your final provocative thought to chew on, what one habit in your own life could maybe benefit from a little Goldilocks adjustment right now, making it slightly harder or maybe even slightly easier to hit that sweet spot? And perhaps more importantly, how might you practice falling in love with the boredom of that specific habit this coming week?